Belonging was supposed to be measurable in their world. A drop of blood on consecrated stone, a pulse of inherited magic, a family name spoken by elders who remembered your first cry. They called it order, called it safety, called it tradition older than the mountain itself. Rowan learned early that those words often meant a locked door and a hand at her throat, not always literal, sometimes worse. When power decided who counted as real, mercy became a rumor. And when a pack decided you were nothing, every breath you took felt like theft. The first bell of dusk had not finished echoing when they brought her into the judgment room. The chamber sat beneath Blackthorn Keep, carved directly into mountain bone, damp and cold enough that her fingers shook before anyone even touched her. Torches snapped in iron brackets, smoke threading up toward a ceiling etched with crescent runes. Pack bloodlines had been sworn in that room for centuries. Rowan had scrubbed those stone floors on her knees since she was 14. She knew every crack, every stain, every place where someone had cried and pretended they had not. Beta Garrick stood near the altar with his hands clasped behind his back, broad shoulders filling the space as if he had been carved for intimidation. Council Elder Sarah sat in the high chair, silver braid pinned tight, mouth thin with impatience. On the side bench, Rowan's foster aunt Lena would not look at her. That hurt more than the rest, though Lena had long ago traded tenderness for survival. "Step forward," Sarah said. Rowan obeyed. She always obeyed first and paid for it later. Her plain gray dress hung loose from too many missed meals. Soap had cracked her knuckles raw. A bruise, yellowing at the edges, hid under her sleeve where a kitchen door had been slammed by accident yesterday. Her hair, dark and heavy, was tied back with twine. The scarf at her throat was the only thing she had kept from her mother, a faded blue strip of wool she wore in every season. It covered the mark she never spoke about. Garrick glanced at the scarf and smiled without warmth. "Remove it." She held still. "It's cold down here." His voice sharpened. "Remove it." Lena finally looked up then, fear darting across her face, not for Rowan, for herself. Rowan untied the scarf and folded it with deliberate care, as if neatness could still protect her. The air hit the left side of her neck. The crescent-shaped birthmark there looked darker tonight, almost ink black against her skin. Sarah's gaze snagged on it for a beat too long, then slid away. Garrick sliced Rowan's palm with a ceremonial blade. Quick, efficient, not gentle. Blood welled bright and immediate, metallic on the air. He pressed her hand to the altar stone where shallow channels formed the old crest of Blackthorn. Nothing happened. Not unusual yet. Sometimes the stone took a moment to answer. Sarah muttered an invocation. Garrick pressed harder, grinding Rowan's hand until pain shot up her arm. Still nothing. No glow, no answering pulse from the runes, no bloodline signature. A quiet moved through the chamber like frost. Garrick released her with a disgusted sound. Again. He cut deeper this time. Blood ran freely over the carved crest and dripped to the floor. The runes remained dark. Sarah stood, robes whispering over stone. No resonance, no alpha line, no regional line, no trace of our kin magic at all. Lena's voice came thin and breathless. There must be a mistake. Her mother served here. Her mother lied. Sarah snapped. Or you did. Rowan wrapped her bleeding hand in the edge of her skirt because no one offered cloth. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She had imagined this test every year since her first shift failed to come, since the healers called her delayed, then weak, then defective. In private, she had allowed one stubborn hope. Maybe the mountain would claim her anyway. Maybe the stone would light, and someone would have to say her name with respect for once. The stone stayed dead. Garrick turned to the guards at the door. "Record it. Rowan has no recognized blood status. Packless. Packless. The word landed like a sentence. He faced her again, slow and satisfied. The council fed you, housed you, allowed you to work in our kitchens and infirmary despite your deficiencies. That charity is over. You'll repay your keep through bonded service until the debt is settled. Rowan swallowed hard. I already work 14 hours a day. Then work 16. Sarah tapped the arm of her chair. No access to ritual spaces, no participation in moon gatherings, no claim to protection under mate law. Heat rose beneath Rowan's skin, sudden and strange, like embers waking under ash. The crescent on her neck pulsed once, hard enough that she felt it in her jaw. She clamped her hand over it. Garrick noticed. His pupils narrowed. What was that? Nothing. He stepped closer, scenting the air the way wolves did when they thought prey had twitched. You smell wrong. Laughter came from one of the guards. She always did. Sarah's expression went calculating. Bring Healer Thomas. Run a null panel. That was not a normal request. Null panels were used for rogues carrying cursed blood or illegal alchemy marks. Rowan's mouth went dry. Lena stood so abruptly her bench scraped. Elder, please. She has done everything asked. If she has no line, then she is harmless. Let her stay in lower quarters. She can continue scrubbing. Your mercy is expensive, Lena, Sarah said, and I am done paying it. The late bell rang above them, muffled by stone and distance. By the time its final note faded, Rowan understood that if she stayed still another minute, she would vanish piece by piece until nothing of her remained. I am not a void for them to fill with orders. I am not a debt ledger with skin. I am standing here, bleeding, and they are deciding what I am worth by what they can extract. If I let this continue, there will be no moment when I choose anything again. No morning that belongs to me. No name that feels like mine. Tomas arrived with a leather case and eyes that avoided hers. He smelled of rosemary and old fear. I need her seated, he said. No, Rowan whispered. Garrick caught her wrist. You don't refuse council order. She jerked back, but he had a wolf's grip and the confidence of a man who had never been denied in front of witnesses. Tomas opened his case and took out 3 glass vials, etched with binding runes meant to hold volatile blood. Sarah spoke as if reading inventory. If the panel confirms null status, transfer her to the Southern Work Camp. Quarry teams need expendable labor. Expendable. That word cut cleaner than any blade. Rowan's pulse jumped, then surged. Heat flared at her neck, sharper now, racing down her spine in bright threads. Her skin prickled. The torchlight bent strangely around her for half a breath, as if the air had become water. Thomas froze, vial halfway to her arm. Elder. Garrick tightened his hold. Take the sample. Rowan moved. Not a plan. Not grace. Pure survival. She drove her heel down on Garrick's foot, twisted and tore free hard enough that his nails raked her skin. Tomas stumbled backward and dropped a vial. It shattered, silvered glass skittering across stone. One guard lunged for her. She ducked under his arm and slammed shoulder first into the chamber door. It gave an inch, then caught on swollen wood. Stop her, Garrick roared. A hand grabbed her braid. Pain exploded across her scalp. She spun and struck blindly with the ceremonial blade still clutched in her left hand. Not deep, not deadly. Just enough to shock the guard into releasing her. He cursed and staggered back. Rowan hit the door again. This time, something answered. The crescent mark at her neck burned white-hot, and a thin arc of pale light raced from her skin into the iron bands on the door. Metal shrieked. The bar snapped. The door flew open so violently it slammed into the outer wall and rebounded. Everyone in the chamber went silent. Sarah's voice cracked on the first word. Seal the keep. Rowan ran. She tore up the stairwell 2 steps at a time, lungs scraping, bare feet slipping on worn stone because she had lost one shoe in the chamber and did not go back for it. Alarm horns erupted overhead, deep and frantic. Wolves answered from the courtyards with rising howls that chased her through every corridor. Servants flattened against walls as she passed. 2 kitchen boys stared, flour on their arms, faces round with shock. No one tried to help. No one ever had. She cut through the laundry court, vaulted a low wall, and dropped into the herb garden behind the infirmary. Lavender crushed beneath her feet, releasing sweet oil into the cold night. Her chest heaved. Her bleeding hand left dark smears on the white stones. Behind her, doors banged open, boots pounded, voices overlapped into a hunting rhythm. North Gate! Roof line! Track her scent. Rain began as a fine mist, then thickened, soaking her hair and dress in moments. Good, some frantic part of her thought. Rain scatters scent. Rain hides tears. Rain makes everyone equally miserable. She skirted the stables and ducked into the old grain tunnel that opened beyond the outer wall, a forgotten maintenance passage she had cleaned once after a flood. Mud sucked at her feet. Rats darted from her path. The tunnel smelled of wet earth and rust and the ghosts of old harvests. Halfway through, she braced a shoulder against a collapsed timber and shoved until it shifted enough to crawl under. Splinters tore her palms. She kept moving. When she emerged on the far side, the mountain wind hit her like a slap. Below the keep, the forest spread black and silver under a cloud-broken moon, pines bending in the storm. The patrol road would be watched. The river gorge would be watched. She chose the steepest descent, where loose shale cut through scrub and thorn, because trained hunters preferred cleaner ground. Behind her, Garrick's voice carried faint and furious from the wall. Find her before dawn. Rowan pulled her mother's scarf from her pocket, wrapped it back around her throat with shaking hands, and started down into the trees. She did not know where safety lived. She only knew where it did not. The keep lights blurred above her through rain and distance, shrinking with each step until they looked less like home and more like watchful eyes she had finally turned her back on. The keep lights vanished behind the trunks, and the mountain swallowed every familiar path she had ever scrubbed, walked, or feared. Rowan slid down wet shale, caught herself on thorn branches, and kept going because stopping felt too much like being found. Rainwater streamed into her eyes. Her left palm throbbed where Garrick had cut her, each heartbeat reopening pain. The scarf at her throat clung to her skin, heavy with water, and beneath it the crescent mark pulsed in slow, deliberate beats that did not match her racing pulse at all. The forest steepened, then flattened into a basin of old pines where mist sat low between roots like breath. She listened for the blackthorn patrol horns and heard only wind at first, then distant howls threading through ridgelines behind her. They were fanning out, hunting by pattern. Garrick would send fast runners to the river and patient trackers to the lower game trails. She veered away from both, angling toward the oldest growth where scents tangled and stone veins broke clean footprints. Branches clawed her bare foot. Mud sucked at her remaining shoe. She moved anyway, shoulders tight, lungs raw, every sense stretched thin. Twice she caught the sour metal smell of blackthorn oil on the air and dropped into fern shadow until it faded. Once she nearly stepped onto a snare line strung ankle-high between saplings and froze with her breath held, then lifted over it, shaking hard enough that her teeth clicked. I am still moving. That means I am not caught. One more tree. One more ridge. I do not need a future tonight, only the next 10 steps, the next 10. I can be afraid and still choose. I can be hurt and still choose. They named me Packless as if that was the same thing as lifeless, as if a word from their mouths could empty me. It did not. I am not empty. I am not done. If I reach dawn, I will decide who I become when no one is ordering my breath. If I fall, I will fall as someone who ran. The ground changed under her feet near midnight, the way mountain ground did when old power had once been laid into it. Roots gave way to packed earth lined with flat river stones, each engraved with shallow runes that caught moonlight in silver threads. Boundary markers, not blackthorns. Their runes were jagged and militarized, cut for dominance. These were curved like crescent tides, old and exacting. Rowan crouched behind a fallen cedar and peered through curtains of rain. Ahead, half hidden by moss and dark, stood a waist-high arch of black stone with no gate in it, only open space and a hanging chain of wolf teeth polished pale by years. A ward line. Crossing without permission could trigger anything from alarm flare to nerve lock. Stories in the kitchen used to call this stretch the Crown Verge, territory held by the mountain's central throne pack, ruled by the Alpha King no one saw unless they were summoned or condemned. She almost laughed, breathless and ragged, because fate had a cruel sense of theater. Flee one wolf den, stumble into a king's border. Behind her, a branch snapped. Too heavy for deer, too deliberate for wind. Rowan rose and moved toward the arch. If Blackthorn found her here first, Garrick would drag her back in chains and call it lawful recovery. If the ward threw her to the ground, at least it would not be his hand on her throat. She stepped through. Cold knifed up both legs. The runes brightened in a ring around her ankles, silver flooding old grooves, then lifting in fine threads that climbed to her knees, paused at her throat, and flared bright at the hidden crescent. The chain of wolf teeth rattled once, hard enough to sound like teeth chattering. Then the light went out. No alarm. No pain. The forest exhaled. A voice came from her left, close enough to raise every hair along her arms. Do not move. 3 wolves stepped from the trees in human form, cloaked in black wool slick with rain, blades low and ready. Their insignia was a crescent over crossed pines, stitched in silver at the shoulder. Border sentries. Their formation was practiced. 1 front, 2 flanking. Rowan lifted her empty hands and tried not to sway. The front guard was a broad woman with a scar through one eyebrow and calm, assessing eyes. Name. Rowan. House. She gave a brittle laugh. None recognized. The guard's nostrils flared as she scented the air. Blackthorn blood in your injuries. Their mark on your skin. Why are you in Crown territory at this hour? Because Blackthorn put me on a quarry ledger, Rowan said. Because they called me expendable and meant it. Because if I had stayed, I would have vanished. The guard's jaw tightened, but her blade did not lower. You crossed a sovereign ward under flight conditions. That makes you either desperate or dangerous. Both, probably, Rowan said, then winced at herself. Even now, a bad joke for cover. I do not have a weapon except the one they cut me with, and I dropped it 2 ridges back. If you send me away, they will be on me before moonset. One of the flank guards, a young man with rain dripping off his lashes, murmured, Captain? Her throat. The captain stepped closer. Rowan did not flinch quickly enough to hide how afraid she was. The captain's fingers hovered near the soaked scarf but did not touch. You carry an active lunar signature, she said slowly. Not Blackthorn. Not any border pack I know. Rowan's throat went dry. I was born with a mark, that is all. Marks like that are never all. The captain angled her head toward the trees. Joran, relay to Frostpost. Report unknown female. Possible marked blood. Blackthorn pursuit likely on our north rim. Tell Warden Hale I am invoking sanctuary hold pending rank review. Joran nodded and ran, wolf fast even on 2 legs. Rowan blinked rain from her eyes. You are offering sanctuary to a trespasser? I am offering temporary containment to someone bleeding on my boundary in a storm, the captain said. Do not make me regret precision. They moved quickly through the trees, silent except for boots in mud. Rowan stumbled twice. The second time, the younger guard caught her elbow without comment. Through gaps in the forest, she saw high watchfires along a distant ridge and the silhouette of stone towers cut into the mountain itself, larger than Blackthorn Keep by half and older by centuries. Crown territory. Not rumor, not kitchen fiction. By the time the rain thinned to a hard drizzle, they reached Frost Post, a border lodge built of dark timber and black rock with carved wolf heads above the eaves. Warmth hit her when the door opened, layered with scents she did not recognize at first. Pine resin, steel oil, wild sage, damp wool, and the clean, charged smell of active ward stone. Inside, a dozen people looked up at once. Some wore patrol leathers, some healer wraps, one a scribe's slate harness. No one rushed her. No one mocked her torn dress or bare foot. That, more than anything, made her chest ache. Warden Hale emerged from a back corridor, silver at his temples, authority in every line of him. The captain gave a clipped report, including the ward flare at Rowan's throat. Hale's gaze sharpened. "Sit her by the hearth," he said. "Lock north shutters. Double the perimeter scent lines. If Blackthorn sends trackers across our markers, I want record and response in writing before sunrise." Rowan sank onto a bench near the fire, hands extended toward heat she did not trust. A healer bound her cut palm with competent fingers and asked no intrusive questions. Across the room, two scouts whispered while glancing at her scarf. The captain stood near the door, alert as a drawn bow. Then the lodge went very quiet for a reason she could not see. A man stepped in from the storm, pulling off wet gloves as if this were any ordinary return from patrol. He wore dark travel leathers under a plain cloak with no rank insignia, but the room shifted around him with unconscious deference. Tall. Power held in reserve rather than displayed. Black hair damp at the ends, a pale scar along his jaw that made his mouth look sterner than it was. He handed his gloves to a guard without breaking stride and looked up. His gaze met Rowan's. The world narrowed to a single held breath. Heat surged beneath her scarf, sharp and bright, racing from the crescent down her spine in a flash so strong her fingers clenched against the bench. At the same instant, the man stopped dead, chest lifting on a harsh inhale. Amber bled into his irises, luminous and feral for one exposed heartbeat, and the scent in the room shifted. Pine and storm and sun-warmed stone, ancient and unmistakably alive. Warden Hale said very carefully, "My king." Rowan forgot how to breathe. Cale had been trained to master first reactions long before he was old enough to lead a hunt, and for years he had done it so well that his own council joked he felt nothing until strategy demanded it. In war rooms, he could listen to casualty reports without letting grief loosen his voice. At treaty tables, he could scent lies and smile anyway. At border courts, he had watched desperate petitioners for hours and never let pity overrule law. Control was not habit for him. It was architecture. It kept people alive. It fractured the moment he looked at the woman by the hearth. Not because she was weak. She was not. She sat bloodied, drenched, shivering in borrowed blanket wool, and still held herself like someone who had chosen survival with both hands and would choose it again. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in the stark, honest way of moonlight on dark water. Because the lunar mark at her throat burned through wet fabric like a second pulse, and the bond he had felt only once in dreams slammed into waking life with enough force to stagger him. Mate. The word landed with the weight of Oathstone. Cale crossed the room slowly, palms open, every instinct in him split between kneeling and roaring. Rowan watched him come with wary stillness, like an injured creature deciding whether to bolt or bite. Up close, he could scent fear, rain, rosemary from fresh bandaging, and beneath it all the wild, clean note that matched the old prophecy records locked under Crown Hall. Lunar marked, unclaimed, outside all known blood registries, rare enough to be dismissed as myth by practical men, until now. "Who hurt you?" he asked, and heard the roughness in his own voice. Her chin lifted. "People who thought they could." A flicker, almost a smile, crossed one corner of his mouth before intensity reclaimed it. "That answer is not enough for a king. I did not come looking for one." "Good," he said quietly. "Kings are usually disappointing." A few guards exhaled startled laughter, brief and thin, the kind that broke tension without breaking discipline. Rowan stared at him as if unsure whether he had made a joke or set a trap. The crescent at her throat flared again. So did the runes on Kale's inner wrists, faint gold threading beneath skin. Rowan's eyes dropped to them, widened, then returned to his face. The pull between them tightened. Not physical force exactly, but command at the level of marrow, a deep recognition older than reason. The animal part of her went rigid, then reached, bewildered and fierce. No. Too fast. Too dangerous. Wanting is how they catch you. Wanting is how you hand them your throat and call it trust. But this is different, says the body I stopped listening to years ago. This is warmth, where there has only been cold duty. This is a door opening inward. He is power, yes, and power has always meant pain, but he is looking at me like I am not an errand, not a ledger line, not a stain to scrub out. I do not know this man. I know the way my pulse answers him. I know terror and relief can occupy the same rib cage. I know I want to run and step closer at once, and that contradiction feels truer than anything the council ever named for me. Kale seemed to hear some piece of that silent storm anyway. He stopped an arm's length away and lowered himself to one knee in front of her, a king reducing his height so she would not have to tilt her head back to meet him. "I will not touch you without permission," he said, "but I need to ask one thing. May I see the mark?" Rowan's fingers moved to the scarf knot by instinct. She hesitated. The room waited. Warden Hale had turned discreetly aside, giving privacy without abandoning guard. The captain at the door watched the shutters, not Rowan, granting dignity she had never been offered in Blackthorn's halls. Slowly, Rowan untied the wet wool and drew it down. The crescent on her neck glowed silver-white in the firelight. No longer dark ink, but living light, edges ringed with tiny script she had never seen before. Kale's breath caught again, sharper this time, and his irises ignited fully, molten gold unmistakable now. He looked not predatory but reverent, as if he had found a shrine after years of believing it destroyed. "Moon witness," he whispered, too low for anyone but her to hear. "It is you." He lifted one hand, stopped short of her skin, waiting. Rowan could have refused. Every lesson carved into her by fear urged refusal. Yet the bond thrummed, steady as a second heartbeat, and somewhere under panic a wall she had not known she carried began to crumble. She nodded once. His fingertips brushed the air a hair above the crescent, never quite touching. Light arced from mark to rune, silver to gold, weaving between them in a thin luminous thread visible even in the bright hearthroom. Several guards inhaled in unison. Warden Hale bowed his head. The captain's posture shifted from caution to formal respect. Locked eye to eye, Rowan and Kale held there in stunned stillness, while the bond settled over both of them like a vow spoken by the mountain itself. Then Kale drew his hand back first. The thread of light thinned, trembled, and folded into nothing. Sound returned to the room in pieces. The hiss of rain against shutters, a log settling in the hearth, someone's unsteady breath near the door. Kale rose slowly, as if abrupt motion might frighten her into flight. "Warden Hale," he said, voice level again though the runes on his wrists still glowed faintly. "Sanctuary protocols, highest tier. She is under my personal protection." Hale bowed once. "At once, my king." Kale looked back to Rowan. You have had every decision taken from you tonight. That ends now. He kept his hands visible at his sides. You can stay in this room with guards at the door, or move to my private quarters in Frostpost, where no one enters without your consent. Either way, the lock answers to your touch alone until dawn. Rowan stared at him, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, blanket gathered in white-knuckled fists. You are asking me? Yes. You could order it. I could, he said. I will not. The captain by the door shifted her weight, listening without intruding. Around them, soldiers found tasks that suddenly required intense concentration. No one looked directly at Rowan now, not out of contempt. Out of respect, careful and imperfect and startling. Kale nodded toward the healer station. Your hand needs deeper stitching than that field wrap. I can assign healer Nessa, or I can do it myself. I served as battlefield medic before I wore a crown. Choice is yours. Confusion crossed her face so openly it hurt him to witness. Why are you doing this? His answer came without hesitation. Because power without restraint becomes predation. I have seen enough of that for 3 lifetimes. He paused, then added with quiet precision. And because a mate bond is sacred, not a leash. I would rather wait a year for your trust than take one thing by force and lose it forever. Her gaze searched him for mockery and found none. I do not understand this shape of mercy. I understand bargains that hide knives, kindness purchased with obedience, protection that means ownership. This feels like standing on new ice and hearing no crack, then waiting for the crack anyway. He says, choose, and my body does not know where to put that freedom. If I choose wrong, do I get punished later when no one is watching? If I choose nothing, do I lose this chance? I am so tired of fear deciding first. He stepped back when he could have stepped in. He asked when no one has asked me anything that mattered in years. I do not trust him. Not yet. But I trust what he just did more than I trust my own habits. Not your quarters, she said at last, voice rough. This room, door in sight. Kyle inclined his head. Done. She swallowed. And you stitch my hand. A flicker of surprise touched his expression, followed by something warmer and more solemn. Done. Healer Nessa brought a clean kit and set it beside him. Kale pulled a chair across from Rowan, then stopped before sitting. May I? When she nodded, he sat and reached for her injured palm with deliberate slowness. His fingers were warm, calloused, steady. The sting of spirits made her flinch. His grip adjusted instantly, supportive without trapping. Tell me if I hurt you, he said. You are hurting me. Then I am sorry, he replied, and changed angle until the pain eased. It was absurdly intimate, this careful mending in front of witnesses, his broad hands working needle and gut thread through torn skin as gently as if he were repairing silk. He did not fill the silence with claims or promises. He told her what he was doing before he did it. 3 stitches, then 2 smaller ones. Pressure wrap. Done. When he finished, he held out a folded cloth, her old blue scarf, dried by the hearth and warmed. I asked no one to wash it, he said. It smelled like your mother's cedar oil. I thought you might want it unchanged. Rowan's throat tightened hard enough to ache. She took it with both hands. Thank you. Kyle rose. Food will come. You can refuse it. 2 guards on the outer threshold, both female, both sworn to Hale for 15 years. If you ask for privacy, they stand farther down the hall. He turned to go, then unclasped a narrow knife from his belt and set it on the bench beside her, hilt first. Royal steel, plain grip, worn from use. Her eyes snapped to his. In case fear wakes before trust does, he said, you should not have to choose between sleeping and safety. He stepped back, giving her space to decide whether to keep it. She curled her fingers around the hilt and felt the room tilt slightly under the weight of what that meant. By the time the next log collapsed into red coals, the rain had softened from drumming sheets to steady patter. Rowan had eaten half a bowl of broth and refused the rest. She had not stopped gripping the knife. The quiet broke with 3 hard knocks on the outer shutter, then a runner's voice from the corridor. Warden. North marker breach request under truce call. Blackthorn delegation at the line. Hale cursed under his breath and crossed to Cale at once. They came fast. Cale's jaw set. Who leads? Beta Garrick. Rowan went cold. Cale looked at her immediately, not at Hale. You are not property to be negotiated over. You have 3 options. Stay here while I answer alone. Listen from behind inner wards. Or stand at my side. Her pulse hammered at her bandaged palm. If I hide, he owns the story. Cale nodded once. Then stand at my side. The north porch of Frost Post faced a narrow clearing where ward stones marked the boundary in a silver arc. Rain silvered the grass. Torchlight painted long shadows across mud and granite. Garrick stood beyond the line with 4 blackthorn trackers, cloaks dark with weather, expressions hard and eager. Even at distance, Rowan recognized his stance, certainty masquerading as law. Hale activated the porch wards with a palm to carved stone. A translucent lattice shimmered into place, humming low. Cale stepped forward, Rowan half astride behind him, Captain on her other side. No one tried to move her back. Garrick's gaze found her and sharpened with ugly satisfaction. There you are, his voice carried across the rain. By authority of Blackthorn Council, I demand immediate return of bonded labor asset Rowan, declared Bloodnull, escaped during official adjudication and assaulted guard personnel in flight. Rowan's stomach turned. Asset. Cale spoke before she could. You are addressing Crown territory. You will use lawful language or you will leave without reply. Garrick spread his hands in a parody of courtesy. Then lawful language. She is Blackthorn responsibility. False, Cale said. She crossed Sovereign Ward unarmed, injured, and under pursuit. Sanctuary invoked by my border captain before your arrival. Your claim is void pending tribunal. Garrick's lip curled. A king invoking tribunal for a servant girl with no line. Interesting priorities. The air around Cale shifted, pressure rising like a storm front. Amber bled into his irises again, bright enough to catch in the rain. When he spoke next, each word landed with controlled force. You will not demean a woman under my protection on my border. One of Garrick's trackers muttered, too loud. Protection for a stray, Crown must be desperate. Cale did not look away from Garrick. Name the speaker. Silence snapped tight. Hale answered from behind, voice crisp. Blackthorn tracker Meikle, 2nd rank. Cale finally turned his head, gaze locking on the man beyond the line. Meikle, hear and remember. You insulted a protected petitioner during truce call. Cross this boundary again before formal summons, and I will charge you with hostile provocation. Penalty includes trade suspension and hunting ban across all Crown trails for 5 years. Meikle paled. Garrick shot him a furious glance. Garrick tried again, louder. She attacked my guard with a blade. Rowan found her voice. He grabbed my hair and tried to hold me for a null panel I did not consent to. Garrick barked a humorless laugh. Consent. Since when does Quarrystock give consent? Cale moved then, one measured step that put his body fully between Rowan and the clearing. Not a theatrical gesture. Instinctive. Absolute. The captain's hand went to her sword. Hale signaled archers into unseen positions along the wall. Careful, Cale said softly, and the softness made it more dangerous. You are 1 sentence away from losing truce privilege at this post. Garrick's nostrils flared. You do not know what she is. Cale's answer was quiet enough that Rowan almost missed it. I know exactly what she is not. Rain ran off his cloak in dark lines. His shoulders were square, unmoving. He did not posture for dominance. He stood like a gate that would not break. I have seen men defend status, territory, pride. I have seen men protect what they own. This is different. He is not using me to win a room. He is refusing to let me be reduced, even by language, and he keeps looking back as if I am part of the decision, not the cost of it. Fear is still here, teeth and all, but it has company now. Relief, strange and raw. Anger that no one stood like this before. A fragile, risky thing that might be hope if I let it breathe. I do not owe trust quickly. He is not demanding it quickly. Maybe that is why the knot behind my ribs is finally loosening. Cale extended his hand slightly toward her without taking his eyes off Garrick, an offer of steadiness, not command. After one suspended heartbeat, Rowan placed her fingers against his wrist. The gold rune there pulsed once under her touch, warm as living stone. Garrick saw it. His expression shifted from contempt to alarm. Cale caught the shift and used it. You will return to Blackthorn and deliver this message to Elder Sarah exactly as spoken. Rowan entered Crown Sanctuary by her own will. Any attempt to seize, coerce, or discredit her through false record will be treated as aggression against the throne pack. A formal summons to tribunal will be issued by First Light. Attend, or concede fault in absentia. Hale lifted a slate and repeated the wording for record. Garrick's jaw worked, calculating outcomes he did not like. You are making this larger than it needs to be, Garrick said. Cale's gaze went glacial. Blackthorn made it larger when you called a woman expendable. For a moment, Rowan thought Garrick might test the ward line anyway. Then he gave a curt signal to his trackers. We will attend your tribunal, he said, each word clipped. And when this is done, you will regret entangling your crown in gutter blood. Cale did not react. Leave. Blackthorn withdrew into the trees, torchlight shrinking, then gone. The clearing held only rain and the low hum of wards. Hale finished the record entry and handed it to the captain for seal dispatch. External contact resolved, he said to Cale. Summons riders ready within the quarter hour. Send them, Cale replied. The captain touched fist to chest and moved off at a run. Silence settled over the porch. Rowan realized her hand was still on Cale's wrist. She started to pull away. He turned gently, lowering his voice for her alone. You did well. I was shaking. So was I. That startled a breath of laughter out of her, brief and incredulous. You did not look like it. I have had practice pretending. The corner of her mouth lifted despite everything. I noticed. He studied her face, rain bright in the torch glow. Would you like to go back inside or walk the inner corridor until your pulse settles? Another choice. Again. Not performance, not politeness. A real one. Walk, she said. Cale offered his arm, formal as an oath. Rowan looked at it, then at him, then slipped her hand through with careful intent. The gesture was small, almost ordinary, yet it felt like setting down one stone from a burden she had carried so long she no longer remembered life without it. Together they turned from the boundary and went inside, not healed, not finished, but no longer standing on opposite sides of every door. The inner corridor curved along the spine of Frostpost, lit by recessed braziers that breathed cedar smoke and amber light across old stone. Rowan kept her hand looped through Cale's arm longer than she meant to, partly because her knees still felt uncertain, partly because the bond between them had settled into a quiet pull that steadied more than it startled. He did not crowd her. He matched her pace and let silence do its work. At the far end of the corridor, Warden Hale waited near a carved map wall, expression grave enough that Rowan felt the fragile calm begin to thin. The captain from the borderline stood beside him with a wax-sealed packet in one hand and a shallow metal tray in the other. Fine gray powder dusted the tray in a crescent smear. Hale bowed to Kale, then looked to Rowan. You asked to stand in decisions that concern you. This concerns you. Kale angled his body so she could see the tray first. What is it? Nullstone residue, said the captain. Recovered from a blackthorn tracker's glove after they withdrew. We took impressions at the boundary when they demanded true sentry. Standard practice. Her jaw tightened. The powder matches traces lifted from Rowan's bandage after the first wash. Rowan stared at the ash-gray glitter. The judgment chamber rose in her memory so vividly she could smell wet stone and iron all over again. Garrick pressing her palm down. Sarah watching. The altar refusing her. Kale's voice cooled. You are saying the blood test was sabotaged. Hale held up the sealed packet. And this was intercepted 2 ridges west of Frostpost. Our outrider caught a blackthorn messenger hawk flying low in storm crosswind. Broken wing, alive. The message capsule carried Syrah's private cipher. He broke the seal and read. Each word clipped, precise, devastating. Asset confirmed with lunar response at activation threshold. Public null declaration successful. Transfer route to Southern Work Camp was approved for extraction phase under Elder authority. If Crown interferes, invoke contagion protocol and demand immediate surrender for regional safety. Do not allow marked subject to enter throne registry. The corridor went still. Rowan heard herself ask. Extraction phase. The captain answered softly. In old council records, that language refers to forced ritual harvesting, blood, marked tissue, and aura imprint. It can leave the subject alive, but hollowed. Sometimes, mind fractured. Heat flashed beneath Rowan's scarf, sharp and furious. Not fear this time. Violation so complete her vision narrowed at the edges. Sarah had never wanted a servant to punish. She had wanted a vessel to open. Kale took the letter from Hale and read it once, then again, as if repetition might alter its meaning. It did not. When he lifted his gaze, the restraint in him had hardened into something colder than anger. Antagonist identified, he said, not as performance, not for drama, but with strategic finality. Elder Sarah orchestrated the false null verdict, the labor transfer, and a planned extraction under cover of law. Garrick executed her field orders. Their objective is to control or erase the lunar mark before it can be entered into throne record. Hale nodded once. If they classify her as contagion risk, some outer pacts will support emergency seizure without hearing evidence. They will try to make me a public threat, Rowan said. The words tasted bitterly familiar. Defective, dangerous, convenient. Kyle turned to her fully. They will try. They will fail. A bitter laugh escaped before she could stop it. You cannot promise that. No, he said. I can promise that we fight with proof, witnesses, and law before we ever touch force. That is how we keep their allies from multiplying. Hale set the tray and letter on the map table. I have already logged both as evidentiary items in Frostpost record and sent duplicate copies with separate riders to Crown Hall and Temple Archive. Chain of custody sealed under my mark and the captain's. The practical detail landed like a handhold in floodwater. Evidence secured. Not rumor. Not her word against theirs in a stone room designed to swallow her. Kale looked to the captain. External contacts. Summons riders departed 13 minutes ago, she said. 1 to Blackthorn for tribunal appearance at dawn. 1 to the Neutral Valley Pacts. 1 to Temple witnesses. Outcome acknowledgements pending. Rowan's pulse eased by a fraction. People would know. Even if they hated her, they would know. I am standing in a corridor where men who outrank mountains are discussing my life like it belongs to me too, and I do not know where to put the grief of that. I should feel triumphant, because the lie has a crack in it now. Instead, I feel the old instinct clawing up my throat, telling me to shrink, apologize, disappear, before anyone can punish me for existing loudly. Sarah called me null and almost made it true by repetition. Garrick called me an asset and expected the world to nod. If I let their language live in me, they win twice. I am not their extraction phase. I am not their contagion script. I am a woman with a scarred hand, a burning mark, and a choice I have never had before. Stay silent and be consumed, or speak and survive the shaking. Kale waited until her breathing steadied, then asked, "Do you want to rest before we plan? Or plan now?" "Plan now." They moved into Frostpost's strategy room, a circular chamber with a central hearth sunk low and ringed by carved seats. Rain rattled against narrow windows. Maps of ridge trails and ward nodes covered the walls. Kale stood at the table while Hale and the captain outlined legal avenues with a blunt clarity Rowan trusted more than soft reassurance. Blackthorn would claim contagion. Crown would counter with ward acceptance, nullstone contamination evidence, and tribunal demand under Interpac law. If Sarah refused attendance, fault defaulted against her petition. Then Hale added the part that made Rowan's stomach knot again. She will not stop at law alone. She will test your fear. If she can provoke a visible power surge in front of neutral witnesses, she will call it instability. Rowan looked down at her hands. I cannot always control it. Kale stepped closer, careful, asking with his posture before words. May I show you a grounding method? At her nod, he held out both palms, leaving space between them. No touch yet. Match my breath. They stood like that for several long moments, inhale and release in measured cadence, the room around them receding to flame crackle and rain. The bond thread stirred, not wild, not consuming, more like a current aligning with riverbanks. Now wrist, he said quietly. She set her fingers against the rune on his inner wrist. Warmth answered at once, gold under skin, and the surge in her mark softened from spike to pulse. Her shoulders dropped on a breath she had not known she was holding. Better, she whispered. His gaze held hers, steady and almost unbearably gentle. You are not a hazard to be contained. You are power learning its own name. The captain coughed lightly and looked very interested in a map pin. Hale pretended not to notice anything at all. By the time the third watch candle burned halfway down, fatigue had edged everyone's focus thinner, but pressure kept tightening. A runner arrived with the first contact outcome. The Valley Pax would send 2 arbiters by dawn. Temple Archive confirmed receipt of Hale's evidence copy and dispatched a witness keeper. Blackthorn sent no acknowledgement. Another message came 5 minutes later, delivered by relay horn from the North Ridge. A truce wagon approached under white cloth, carrying supplemental tribunal documentation from Elder Sarah's office and requesting immediate acceptance into Frostpost records. Hale's expression went flint hard. She is moving faster than expected. Kale's voice sharpened. No entry past outer gate. Documents inspected in open rain under ward screen. Captain, you and I meet them. Rowan stays inside. Rowan shook her head. If it names me, I need to hear it. Kale hesitated. The tension between protection and autonomy flashed across his face exactly as it had on the porch. Then he nodded once. Inner gallery only. Behind shield glass. You observe. You do not step into direct range unless I ask. Understood. The North Gate Court was a rectangle of wet stone enclosed by high timber palisade and ward pillars that hummed with pale light. Rowan stood in the inner gallery above, hands gripping the rail, Kale below with Hale and 6 guards. Outside the ward line waited a narrow wagon draped in white truce cloth, 2 Blackthorn clerks under hoods, and one familiar shape, Garrick, rain beating on his shoulders like cold metal. Delivery only, Garrick called. No demand for entry. Kale answered from within the glow of the boundary line. State contents. Emergency decree from Elder Sarah invoking regional health safeguards. Supplemental witness affidavits. Sealed by council blood. Hale murmured to Kale, then signaled a guard. A long iron hook extended through the ward to drag the document chest across the stone without breaking line. Garrick watched with a smile that never touched his eyes. The chest was cedar, banded in silver, waxed shut with Blackthorn's crest. Hale circled it once, checking for obvious runes, then crouched and held a detection prism over the seal. The prism stayed clear. "Clean surface," he said. Kale looked up toward the gallery. Rowan met his gaze and gave a small nod she did not feel. Nothing about this felt clean. Hale broke the wax and lifted the lid. A hiss split the rain. Gray vapor burst from the chest in a tight upward plume, then flattened outward across the court like spilled ink. Ward pillars screamed, light strobing from white to sickly green. Guards shouted and threw cloth masks over mouths. Kale slammed his palm to the nearest pillar and poured power into the failing lattice, gold runes blazing up his forearm. "Null Ash Compound," Hale barked, already backing away. "Seal lungs. Do not let it reach the gallery vents." Too late. Rowan smelled bitter stone and old rot as the first tendril of vapor curled through the inner grate beside her. Her mark ignited with searing force, vision flashing silver at the edges. She staggered back from the rail and hit the wall hard enough to bruise. Below, Garrick shouted an order, and 3 figures in dark cloaks broke from the wagon's far side. Not clerks at all, but strike runners carrying hooked chain launchers etched with seizure runes. Kale drew steel and met the first chain midair, blade ringing. The second wrapped a guard's shield and yanked him to one knee. The third fired high, toward the gallery. Rowan ducked. The hook smashed through the wooden rail where her chest had been a heartbeat earlier, chain rattling like teeth. Alarms erupted through Frostpost, a layered howl of horn and ward siren. The captain sprinted into the court from the east passage with archers behind her. Garrick crossed the boundary line in the confusion, cloak smoking where ward sparks licked it, and for one brutal second he looked up straight at Rowan with triumph on his face. "Contagion containment," he roared for all to hear. "By elder decree, seize the marked subject." Kale's answering snarl carried even through rain. He drove Garrick back with 2 hard strikes, but the null ash cloud thickened, chewing holes through the ward pattern faster than he could reinforce it. Above, Rowan's knees buckled as pain lanced from her throat down her spine. Bond and Mark caught in violent feedback. She grabbed the broken rail and forced herself upright, breathing through grit and fire, while below her king fought in collapsing light, and blackthorn chains climbed toward her again. The hooked launcher snagged the gallery edge, tore a long strip of timber free, and recoiled for another shot. Rowan stumbled sideways, heel skidding on wet stone dust, and slammed her shoulder into a support post hard enough to spark pain down her arm. "Down from the gallery!" Kale shouted without looking up, blade locked against Garrick's. "Inner stairs now." Another tendril of null ash curled from the vent and brushed Rowan's throat. The crescent answered with brutal heat, a pulse that stole half her breath. She dropped to one knee. Below, ward pillars flickered in jagged intervals, each failure opening wider gaps in the boundary where blackthorn runners pressed in. The captain's archers fired from the east passage. One strike runner spun and fell, chain launcher clattering across the stones. The second ducked behind the truce wagon and loosed a hooked line blind toward Kale's back. Hale intercepted it with his forearm shield, the impact driving him into a pillar. Sparks jumped up the ward lattice, green and sickly, then dimmed again. Garrick laughed through the rain, voice carrying with theatrical certainty. "Look at him, Crown Wolves. Your king bleeds strength into failing wards for a marked liability. This is your governance now. Infection and panic." Kale drove him back a step. "You smuggled null ash under truce cloth." "I brought regional protection," Garrick snapped. "You brought delusion." Rowan's vision swam. The bond between her and Kale pulled taut, not with tenderness now but strain, like rope under floodwater. If he held the wards and fought Garrick, he could not do both for long. If the lattice collapsed, Blackthorn could claim active contagion breach and force a seizure under emergency statute. Exactly what Sarah wanted written into record before dawn. I can curl up in this corner and wait to be carried, and maybe he survives long enough to carry me. Maybe he does not. Maybe they chain me and call it medicine while witnesses nod at legal language. I know this script. I have lived inside it since childhood. Stay small, stay quiet. Maybe pain passes over you, but quiet never saved me. Obedience never saved me. Every door I have crossed tonight opened only when I moved first. I am shaking. I am hurting. I am still here. If this mark is a weapon to them, then I will make it a voice they cannot edit. She tore the scarf from her throat and wrapped it around her mouth against the ash. Then she seized the chain buried in the rail and yanked. The hook tore free with a shriek of metal, dropping the heavy length at her feet. Rowan hauled it toward the nearest gallery ward conduit, a waist-high bronze post etched with old moon script, and slammed the hook around it. Silver raced along the carved lines at once. The post flared, then the mark at her neck answered with a blinding pulse that shot down her spine and out through her hands. Pain speared through her wrists, but the conduit drank it and hurled it into the main lattice below. White light slammed across the failing wards, shoving back the green corruption like tide over oil. Every head in the court snapped upward. Rowan rose, gripping the conduit with both hands as the current roared through her. Her voice ripped raw through cloth and rain. Record this under open ward witness. Blackthorn delivered weaponized null-ash in a sealed truce chest. Garrick crossed boundary during truce call and ordered seizure. That is not containment. That is abduction. Hale, coughing hard behind his mask, struck his palm to the nearest record stone. Runes ignited blue. "Statement logged," he shouted, "by Frostpost law and Crown Code." Garrick stared up at Rowan, sudden uncertainty fracturing his composure. "Get down from there," he barked. "You do not understand what you are." She pulled the cloth from her mouth and met his gaze through driving rain. "You mean you failed to define it." By the time the fourth alarm note rolled across Frostpost, reinforcement guards flooded the North Court from both inner corridors, shields raised, masks on. The captain signaled 2 to haul the null-ash chest into a containment circle, and 3 more to pin the remaining strike runner against the wagon wheel. Cale used the opening Rowan bought, pivoted inside Garrick's guard, and knocked his sword spinning into the mud. Still Garrick did not yield. He drew a short bone blade from his boot and lunged low, not at Cale, at the nearest ward pillar. If he cracked the pillar now, he could still claim uncontrolled surge. Rowan let go of the conduit and ran for the gallery stairs. Cale caught Garrick's wrist before the blade met stone. They crashed together, boots sliding in ash-slick rainwater, each straining for leverage. Garrick snarled and drove his shoulder into Cale's ribs. Cale's breath hitched. His grip held. Rowan hit the court at a sprint and grabbed the fallen chain launcher. The mechanism was heavier than she expected, gears clogged with rain and powder, but the launch hook still sat loaded in its channel. She planted her feet, aimed at the mud just behind Garrick's knees, and fired. The hook punched into wet ground and snapped the chain taut across his legs. Garrick lost balance. Cale twisted, using the momentum, and slammed him face first into the stones without striking to maim. The bone blade skidded away. "Now," Rowan shouted. The captain's squad moved as one, shields closing around Garrick while 2 guards bound his wrists with warded iron. He bucked and cursed, but the irons bit and held, runes glowing red where his pulse hit them. Cale stepped back, chest heaving once, then twice, rain and ash streaking his face. He looked at Rowan first, scanning for injury. She gave a short nod. He returned it, fierce relief cutting through battle focus for a heartbeat. Hale strode forward with a slate and spoke in full hearing voice. "Garrick of Blackthorn, you are detained under Crown authority for truce breach, armed incursion, attempted unlawful seizure, and chemical assault by null ash dispersal. Do you contest identity and charges? Garrick spat gray water and laughed hoarsely. Contest. All of it. She is unstable, and you are enthralled by a mating delusion. Rowan walked until she stood within arm's reach of him, rain plastering her hair to her cheeks, scarf hanging loose from one fist. Look at me and say Sarah did not order extraction phase. His eyes cut to hers, calculating whether silence helped him more than denial. I owe answers to councils, not quarry girls. Wrong, Rowan said. Tonight you answer to the woman you tried to erase. Cale's voice came low beside her. He speaks under ward. Lies will register. Hale touched the record stone again. Blue sigils rose around Garrick's bound hands and throat, a truth lattice narrow as wire. Garrick saw it and bared his teeth. Rowan held his gaze. Did Elder Sarah authorize the false null verdict? His jaw locked. The lattice brightened. He tried to look away and could not. Yes, he ground out. Did you contaminate the altar test with nullstone? A beat. Then, furious. Yes. Did you bring null ash in that chest to force a seizure under contagion pretext? His laugh cracked. Yes, because no one hands power to a stray when they can extract it and keep order. Murmurs broke across the court, soldiers and scribes and runners hearing the admission spill into open record. Hale read each confession back for verification and sealed them to slate with his signet ring. Garrick jerked against the irons, eyes bright with hatred now stripped of certainty. You think this ends with me in chains. Sarah still sits counsel. She will name you plague by sunrise. Half the valley will cheer while they drag you to a stone table. Rowan crouched so they were level, voice quiet enough that he had to listen. You keep mistaking fear for loyalty. People obeyed you because they thought there was no alternative. Tonight they watched you poison a truce court and call it protection. He sneered. You are nothing without his crown behind you. She shook her head once. I crossed your border alone. A long silence followed, broken only by rain ticking on armor and the low thrum of stabilizing wards. Cale turned to Hale. Evidence status. Primary physical evidence secured, Hale said crisply. Null ash chest contained, residue sampled, delivery wagon seized, chain launchers logged, confession captured under truth lattice with 3 officer witnesses and live ward record. Copies already transmitting to Crown Hall and Temple Archive. External contacts. Valley arbiters reached South Ridge 10 minutes out. Temple witness keeper entering East Gate now. Blackthorn acknowledgement still absent, which now reads as evasion. Cale nodded. Then we proceed in full daylight. Open tribunal. No closed chambers. Garrick lunged again despite the irons, voice rising to a ragged shout. You sentimental fool, Cale. You cannot rule by mercy. Cale faced him, utterly still. His irises held that molten amber edge again, but his tone was cool, almost austere. Mercy without boundaries is weakness. Law without conscience is predation. You chose predation. He looked to the captain. Remove him to Stonehold 3. Separate from his runners. No private communication. Double ward on the door. The captain saluted and signaled her team. They hauled Garrick upright. Mud streaked his cloak. The arrogant set of his shoulders had collapsed into jerking resistance and hoarse threats that no longer carried authority, only noise. As they dragged him toward the inner cells, he twisted one last time to spit words over his shoulder at Rowan. When Sarah takes this post apart, she will start with your throat. Rowan did not flinch. Then she should come herself. The cell door slammed somewhere down the corridor, iron on stone, final as a verdict. For a moment, no one moved. Then the court began to breathe again. Guards reset pillar seals. Healers checked masks and lungs. Scribes copied the confession slate by lamplight under ward glass. The null ash haze thinned, trapped within a containment ring that hummed like distant bees. Kale stepped toward Rowan and stopped close enough that she could feel the heat of him through rain-soaked cloth, not touching until she tipped her chin in permission. His hand came to her shoulder, steady and grounding. "You held the ward when it was collapsing," he said softly. "You turned his own operation into evidence." Rowan's laugh trembled on the edge of exhaustion. "I also fired stolen hardware in a crowded court. One of your better decisions tonight." Despite the ache in her throat and the tremor in her knees, a brief smile found her mouth. It faded as she looked toward the corridor where Garrick had vanished. This was one arm of it. Sarah is still there. "Yes," Kale said, "and now she has fewer lies left to stand on." Rain eased to a fine mist. In the quieter air, Rowan could hear hoofbeats approaching the outer gate, measured and official. Valley Arbiters. Temple Witness. The next fight arriving exactly as promised, but on ground that no longer belonged to secrecy. She drew a slow breath, felt the mark at her throat settle from wildfire to pulse, and kept her gaze on the gate as it opened. 2 Valley Arbiters entered beneath white lanterns, their cloaks striped in neutral gray, followed by a temple witness keeper carrying a cedar coffer bound in silver wire. Dawn had not fully broken, but the eastern sky had paled enough to turn the wet stones pearl-colored. The witness keeper, an older woman named Ilya, wasted no words. "Open tribunal is now in session under Mountain Compact," she said, voice clear as bell metal. "Present all collected evidence in order of seizure, with chain of custody spoken aloud." Hale did exactly that. He set the null ash chest on a warded table, then the residue tray, then the seized chain launchers, then Garrick's bone blade sealed in wax cloth, then the intercepted cipher letter from Sarah. He called names with each handoff: Captain for boundary impressions, Joran for relay dispatch, Outrider proof of Hawk interception, Nessa for the bandage trace from Rowan's palm, and 2 scribes for duplicate records sent to Crown Hall and Temple Archive. No item was waved away. No item vanished into private hands. When Garrick was brought out in irons, he looked smaller in daylight, soaked arrogance replaced by rigid fury. Sarah arrived minutes later under escort, robes immaculate despite the mud, mouth thin with contempt. She did not bow to Kale, only to the arbiters. Rowan stood at Kale's side and felt every eye on her, but no one could force her back into silence now. The truth lattice glimmered between carved posts. Ilya read the charges. Garrick denied, then denied again, until Hale replayed his own recorded confession through the ward stone, and his voice filled the court in rough, furious clarity. "Yes, yes, yes." Sarah pivoted immediately, claiming coercion, forged records, Crown Theater. Then Thomas stepped forward from the witness line, hands shaking hard enough to rattle his healer bracelets. "I prepared the null panel kit," he said, staring at the ground, then at Rowan. "I also prepared the contaminant powder under Elder Order. I told myself I had no choice. That was cowardice, not truth. I did it." Lena came next, shoulders bowed but voice steady. "I saw Sarah study Rowan's mark for years and pretend she had not. I heard Garrick promise transfer papers before the blood test was run. I stayed quiet to keep my room and rations." Her face crumpled. "I thought survival meant looking away. I was wrong." A long, hard silence followed. The arbiters asked questions until no thread hung loose. Why the false null result? Why the quarry transfer? Why contagion language? Why truce cloth around a weapon chest? Meikle, called from the holding line, confirmed he carried nullstone residue as ordered and accepted his lesser charge for participating in the incursion. He was stripped of rank and placed under service probation in neutral territory. At full sunrise, Ilya placed her palm on the coffer and opened it. Inside lay an obsidian registry tablet etched with moon script identical to the fine writing that had appeared around Rowan's crescent. "The strange script on her mark and the ward acceptance are linked," Ilya said. This is sovereign lunar designation, dormant for generations. Not contagion, not curse, not null. The mark recognized Crown Ward because it predates Pack borders. By temple and compact law, Rowan is entered as recognized lunar bonded mate to the reigning Alpha King. She pressed stylus to stone and inscribed Rowan's name. Status changed in a single deliberate line. Judgment followed cleanly. Garrick was sentenced to 10 years in stone hold and labor restitution under neutral oversight, barred from command for life. Sarah was removed from council authority, her seal broken in public, then exiled to a remote monastery under temple supervision, where she would copy legal records she had twisted until her term ended. Blackthorn Keep was placed under provisional governance by the Valley Arbiters and Warden Hale until new elections. Lena, by Rowan's request, was assigned paid service in Crown kitchens with protection status and no private debts. Tomas kept his healer license only after accepting censure and oath-bound service in plague wards, where consent law was enforced in writing on every door. When the formal words ended, Cale turned to Rowan in the same crowded court and asked, so everyone could hear, "Do you choose to remain at my side as recognized mate, with full right to refuse any right not freely given?" Her answer did not shake. Yes, freely. Moonrise painted the high terrace in silver by the time the claiming circle was lit. Not a private chamber, not a hidden bed, but open sky, witnesses at respectful distance, and a ring of cedar torches that breathed warm resin into the cold air. Rowan wore dark wool trimmed in pale thread, her mother's blue scarf braided into her hair. Cale wore no crown, only a plain black coat and the old scar at his jaw, as if he understood this moment asked for truth, more than ceremony. Ilya spoke the old vow and stepped back. No one else moved. Cale approached until he stood close enough for Rowan to feel his breath at her temple. "Last choice before we begin," he murmured. "Say stop, and we stop." She lifted her chin. "Do not stop." His hands came to her shoulders, firm and careful. The bond hummed low, a current under skin. He bent his head to the place where neck met shoulder and paused there, asking again without words. Rowan threaded her fingers into his sleeve and nodded. His bite was swift and precise. Pressure first, then sharp pain that flashed bright through her collarbone and down her arm. She gasped, knees dipping, and he held her upright without tightening into restraint. Heat surged around the wound, not burning this time but opening, like locked doors unbolting one after another. Pain thinned into fierce warmth, warmth into a spreading ache of relief so profound it made her eyes sting. She felt his steadiness pour through the bond, protect, cherish, stand, home. Not commands, promises. Against her skin he whispered, rough with emotion, "Mine." Rowan's pulse answered in her throat and wrists, and the mark at her neck flared silver white, threading light across both of them. The circle of witnesses bowed their heads. When he drew back, his eyes held that ancient amber edge, but his expression was stripped bare, vulnerable and reverent. He touched her cheek. "Rowan, say it only if it is true." She reached for him with both hands, pulled him down, and bared her teeth at the base of his throat where shoulder met neck. He went still, offering without defense. Her bite landed with less force than his, but no less intent. A sharp claim followed by a rush that startled a laugh and a sob out of her at once. Gold leapt under his skin, then silver, then both braided together in a visible thread that arced between their marks and settled deep. She tasted rain and salt, and the wild bright note that was only him. The ache in her jaw melted into a molten, trembling joy that filled her chest so completely she had to close her eyes. "Yours," she whispered against his skin. Then, clearer, "Mate." His forehead came to hers. "Mate." The bond completed like a bell struck in clear air. It moved through her in layered waves. His memories of long winters, war maps, sleepless watches, the weight of command, her years of kitchens and stone floors, the humiliation room, the run-through rain, the first time she chose herself. None of it erased. All of it witnessed. The knot behind her ribs that she had carried for years loosened fully at last. They stood holding each other while the terrace wind lifted their hair and the torches burned steady. No one rushed the aftermath. No one made it spectacle. When they finally turned back to the circle, Ilya raised her staff. By bond and law, Rowan is Luna of the Crown Pack. The words rolled through the gathered wolves, then returned in one voice, not shouted, but sworn. Kale took Rowan's hand and led her down from the terrace to the great hall where bread, roasted roots, and hot broth waited in long lines. Guards laughed without tension. Children from the lower households ran between benches with sugared plum slices and were gently redirected before collisions. Nessa pressed a clean dressing to Rowan's fresh mark and pretended not to smile when Kale hovered too close. Hale accepted a cup of spiced tea from Lena, who met Rowan's eyes and, for the first time in years, did not look away. Later, when the hall quieted and the last evidence tablets were locked in temple cases for permanent archive, Rowan stepped onto the balcony above the sleeping courtyards. Kale came behind her, wrapped a cloak around both of them, and rested his chin lightly on her shoulder, careful of the bite. Below, frost post lights glowed warm against dark pines. No horns, no alarms, just wind in the eaves and distant wolves singing to a calm moon. Rowan touched the mark at her throat, then the one she had left on him. They said I was nobody. Kale laced his fingers through hers, bond settled and sure. They were wrong. She leaned back into him and watched dawn's first pale line begin again beyond the eastern ridge, not as threat this time, but as future.